The iron shackles had left scars on her wrists that no amount of time could erase. And when Eliza Harmon stepped off the stagecoach in Tombstone, Arizona Territory, in the late spring of 1881, she carried nothing but a small carpetbag and the weight of a past she desperately wanted to forget. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty Main Street, and Eliza squinted against the glare, taking in the wooden storefronts, the saloons with their painted signs, and the men who stopped mid-stride to stare at a woman traveling alone. She was 23 years old, thin from too many meals skipped, with dark hair pulled back severely from a face that might have been pretty if not for the hardness around her eyes. Those eyes had seen too much, endured too much, and now they searched for something she had never truly known: freedom. She had escaped 6 months ago from a brothel in San Francisco, where she had been sold at 16 by a man she had trusted, a man who had promised her work as a seamstress, and instead delivered her into a nightmare that lasted 7 years. The madam had kept them locked up, controlled every aspect of their lives, took every cent they earned and beat them when they disobeyed. Eliza had been property, owned as surely as if she had been livestock, and the shame of it burned in her chest even now that she was free. Tombstone was supposed to be her fresh start. She had heard there was work here for women willing to take in laundry or cook for the miners who flooded into town seeking silver. She had saved every penny from 3 months of washing dishes in Tucson, and she had enough to rent a room for 2 weeks while she found employment. After that, she would have to make it work or starve, and starving seemed preferable to ever going back to the kind of life she had escaped. The hotel clerk, a balding man with suspicious eyes, looked her up and down when she asked for a room. "You alone, miss?" "I am," Eliza said, lifting her chin. "I am looking for honest work. Laundry, cooking, cleaning. If you know of anyone who needs help, I would appreciate the information." The clerk's expression softened slightly. "There is a boarding house on 4th Street. Mrs. Patterson runs it. She is always looking for help in the kitchen. Tell her Jacob sent you." "Thank you," Eliza said, and meant it. Small kindnesses still surprised her, and she hoarded them like precious gems. Her room was small and hot, but it was hers. She set her carpetbag on the narrow bed and went to the window, looking out at the street below. Men rode past on horseback, wagons creaked by loaded with supplies, and somewhere in the distance, she heard the sound of hammering. Tombstone was a town being built, a place where people came to reinvent themselves, and maybe, just maybe, she could do the same. She found the boarding house the next morning. It was a 2-story structure with a wide porch, and the smell of fresh bread wafted from the open windows. Mrs. Patterson was a stout woman in her 50s with flour on her apron and a no-nonsense manner that reminded Eliza of her own mother, dead these 10 years past. "You ever cooked for 20 men at once?" Mrs. Patterson asked, hands on her hips. "I have cooked for more," Eliza said truthfully, thinking of the brothel where she had sometimes helped in the kitchen when the regular cook was drunk. "I am a hard worker, ma'am. I do not complain and I do not cause trouble." Mrs. Patterson studied her for a long moment, and Eliza wondered what she saw. Did the shame show on her face? Could this woman tell what she had been? "You look like you have had a hard time of it," Mrs. Patterson said finally. "I do not ask questions about where people come from. This is the West and everyone has a past, but I run a respectable house and I expect respectable behavior. You show up on time, you work hard, and you will have 3 meals a day, a bed in the attic, and $4 a week. That sound fair?" $4 a week was more than Eliza had dared hope for. "More than fair, ma'am. When do I start?" "Right now. We have got breakfast to clean up and lunch to prepare." Eliza fell into the work with a gratitude that bordered on religious fervor. She scrubbed pots until her hands were raw, peeled potatoes until her fingers cramped, and hauled water from the pump until her back ached. She welcomed the pain because it was honest pain, earned through honest work, and every night when she collapsed onto her narrow cot in the attic, she slept without dreams. The boarders were mostly miners and cowboys, men who worked hard and ate heartily and treated her with a rough courtesy that she appreciated. They called her Miss Eliza, tipped their hats when she brought out platters of food, and kept their comments respectful. For the first time in 7 years, men looked at her as a person rather than a commodity, and the difference was profound. It was 3 weeks after she started at the boarding house that she met Thomas Grayson. He came in for supper on a Wednesday evening, dusty from the trail, with a bedroll slung over one shoulder and saddlebags in his hand. He was tall, probably 27 or 28, with sandy hair that needed cutting and gray eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy, worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, scuffed boots with spurs that jingled when he walked, and a gun belt that sat easy on his hips. "I am looking for a room for a few nights," he told Mrs. Patterson. "Someone in town said you run a clean place with good food." "That would be accurate," Mrs. Patterson said. $2 a night includes 3 meals. You want it?" "I do, ma'am." "Then sit yourself down. Supper will be ready in 10 minutes. Thomas took a seat at the long dining table, and Eliza tried not to stare as she carried out bowls of stew and plates of cornbread. There was something different about him, something in the way he moved with quiet confidence, the way his eyes were kind when he thanked her for the food. She had learned to read men in the brothel, learned to spot cruelty and selfishness and violence before it was turned on her, and she sensed none of those things in Thomas Grayson. Over the next few days, she noticed him watching her when she worked. Not the leering stares she was accustomed to, but something else, something that seemed almost like concern. He always thanked her when she brought him coffee, always insisted on carrying heavy pots when he saw her struggling. And once, when another boarder made a crude joke that skirted the line of decency, Thomas shut him down with a cold look that had the man apologizing immediately. On Sunday afternoon, Eliza was hanging laundry in the yard behind the boarding house when Thomas came out to the porch. He had cleaned up, shaved, put on a fresh shirt, and he stood there for a moment as if gathering his courage. "Miss Eliza," he called. "I was wondering if you might like to take a walk this evening. After supper, maybe, if you are not too tired." Eliza's hands stilled on the wet sheet she was pinning to the line. A walk, such a simple thing, and yet it terrified her. What did he want? What would he expect in return? I do not. She began, then stopped. She was free now, free to make her own choices, free to say yes or no. "I would like that," she said finally, surprised to find it was true. They walked through the streets of Tombstone as the sun began to set, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and pink. Thomas kept a respectful distance, his hands in his pockets, and talked about inconsequential things. The ranch where he worked up north, the cattle drive he had just finished, his plans to save enough money to buy his own piece of land someday. "What about you?" he asked as they paused at the edge of town, looking out at the vast expanse of desert. "Where are you from?" "San Francisco," Eliza said, the lie coming easily. "But I wanted a change." "I understand that," Thomas said. "Sometimes a person needs to start fresh." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Thomas said, "You work too hard, Miss Eliza. I see how Mrs. Patterson runs you ragged from dawn to dusk. You deserve better than that." "I am grateful for the work," Eliza said stiffly. "It is honest work, and that is all I need." Something in her tone must have warned him off because he nodded and changed the subject. They walked back to the boarding house as the stars began to appear, and when they reached the porch, Thomas tipped his hat to her. "Thank you for the company," he said. "I hope we can do this again." "Perhaps," Eliza said, and escaped into the house before he could see the confusion on her face. She did not know what to make of Thomas Grayson. He was leaving in 2 days, heading back to the ranch where he worked, and there was no point in getting attached to a man who would be gone before she had time to sort out her feelings. But that night, lying in her attic bed, she thought about his kind eyes and gentle voice, and for the first time in years, she let herself imagine what it might be like to be courted by a decent man. Thomas left on Tuesday morning, but not before seeking her out in the kitchen. "I will be back in 6 weeks," he said. "The boss sends me to Tombstone every month or so for supplies. I hope you will still be here." "I will be," Eliza said, suddenly certain of it. "Then I will look forward to seeing you again, Miss Eliza." True to his word, Thomas returned 6 weeks later. This time he stayed for 4 days, and they took walks every evening. He told her about the ranch, about the hard work of mending fences and breaking horses and driving cattle. He told her about growing up in Texas, about his parents who had died of fever when he was 19, about his younger sister who had married a shopkeeper in Dallas. He talked easily, filling the silences that Eliza could not, and slowly, cautiously, she began to talk too. She told him about growing up in a small town in Missouri, about her father who had been a blacksmith and her mother who had made the best apple pies in the county. She told him about their deaths in a house fire when she was 15, about being sent to live with an aunt who did not want her. She stopped there, unable to go further, unable to speak the words that would reveal what she had been. "Something bad happened to you," Thomas said one evening as they sat on a bench outside the church, watching the last light fade from the sky. It was not a question. Eliza's throat tightened. "Yes, you do not have to tell me," Thomas said, "but I want you to know that whatever it was, it does not change how I see you." "You do not know what you are saying," Eliza whispered. "I know that you are brave," Thomas said firmly. "I know that you work harder than anyone I have ever met. I know that you have a kindness in you despite whatever you have been through. That is what I see, Eliza. That is all I see." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But the voice in her head, the voice that sounded like the madam, told her that no decent man would want her if he knew the truth. She was damaged goods, used up, worthless. "I should get back," she said, standing abruptly. "Mrs. Patterson will wonder where I am." Thomas stood too, and for a moment she thought he might reach for her hand. Instead, he just nodded. "I will see you at breakfast." That night, Eliza cried for the first time since arriving in Tombstone. She cried for the girl she had been before San Francisco, for the innocence that had been stolen from her, for the woman she might have become if life had been kinder. And she cried because Thomas Grayson was a good man, and she did not know if she could ever be worthy of a good man's love. Thomas came back every month through the summer and into the fall. Each visit, he stayed a little longer, and each visit, the bond between them grew stronger. He brought her small gifts, a ribbon for her hair, a bar of lavender soap, a book of poetry that he said had belonged to his mother. She treasured each gift, hiding them in her carpetbag like talismans against the darkness of her past. In September, Thomas asked her to a dance at the town hall. Eliza had not danced in years, had almost forgotten how, but Thomas was patient, guiding her through the steps, his hand warm and steady at her waist. She saw other women watching them, whispering behind their fans, and paranoia crept in. Did they know? Could they tell what she had been? "Ignore them," Thomas murmured, pulling her a little closer. "They are just jealous because you are the prettiest woman here." "I am not," Eliza protested, but she felt a warmth bloom in her chest at his words. "You are to me," Thomas said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made her eyes sting with unshed tears. They stepped outside during a break in the music, needing air, needing space from the crowd. The October night was cool, a relief after the heat of summer, and Eliza wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Eliza," Thomas said, turning to face her. "I have been thinking about this for months, and I cannot wait any longer. I care for you. I care for you more than I have ever cared for anyone. I want to court you properly, with the intention of marriage if you will have me." Eliza's heart stuttered in her chest. Marriage, a husband, a normal life. Everything she had dreamed of during those long, terrible nights in San Francisco. But she could not accept under false pretenses. He deserved to know the truth. "There is something I have to tell you," she said, her voice shaking. "Something about my past, and after I tell you, you may not want me anymore." "Nothing you could say would change my feelings," Thomas said. "Do not be so certain," Eliza said. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. When I was 16, I came to San Francisco with a man who promised me work as a seamstress. Instead, he sold me to a brothel. I was kept there for 7 years. I was somebody's property once, Thomas. The madam owned me, controlled me, took everything from me including my dignity and my freedom. I escaped 6 months ago and I have been running ever since. That is who I am. That is what I was. The words hung in the air between them, terrible and true. Eliza waited for the disgust to cross Thomas's face, for him to turn away, for him to leave her standing alone in the dark. Instead, he reached for her hands, holding them gently in his own. "Now you're your own woman," Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion. "What was done to you was not your fault. You were a child and you were betrayed by someone who should have protected you. But you survived, Eliza. You escaped and you built a life for yourself. That takes more courage than most people will ever have." "I am not the innocent girl you thought I was," Eliza said, tears streaming down her face. "I am broken, I am used, I am not worthy of a man like you." "That is where you are wrong," Thomas said fiercely. "You are the strongest, bravest, most worthy woman I have ever met. What happened to you does not define you. What you did after, how you fought for your freedom, how you built a life with your own 2 hands, that is what defines you. And I love you, Eliza Harmon. I love you with everything I am." Eliza sobbed, and Thomas pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried out 7 years of pain and shame and fear. He murmured soft words against her hair, telling her she was safe, that he had her, that he would never let anyone hurt her again. And slowly, Eliza began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have the life she had always wanted. When her tears finally subsided, Thomas cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away the last traces of moisture. "Marry me, Eliza. Not because you owe me anything or because you need protection, but because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes," Eliza whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Thomas kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and Eliza felt something inside her chest that had been frozen for 7 years finally begin to thaw. This was what it felt like to be cherished, to be valued, to be loved for who she was rather than what she could provide. This was freedom, real freedom, and it was more precious than silver or gold. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church on the edge of town. Mrs. Patterson stood up as Eliza's witness, and one of Thomas's fellow cowboys came down from the ranch to stand up for him. Eliza wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her sew, and she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers that Thomas had picked that morning. She had never felt more beautiful. The preacher spoke about love and commitment, about the sacred bond of marriage, and when it came time for the vows, Eliza's voice was strong and clear. She was not ashamed anymore. She was not hiding. She was Eliza Grayson now, wife to a good man, and she would face the future with her head held high. After the ceremony, Mrs. Patterson hosted a small celebration at the boarding house. She had made a cake, and there was coffee and whiskey, and the boarders all raised their glasses to toast the new couple. One of the miners played a fiddle, and Thomas danced with Eliza in the parlor, holding her close and whispering promises about the life they would build together. That night, in the hotel room Thomas had rented, Eliza was nervous. The intimacy of marriage was different from what she had endured in the brothel, but the memories were still there, lurking in the shadows of her mind. Thomas seemed to sense her fear because he took his time, moving slowly, constantly checking to make sure she was all right. He kissed her softly, touched her gently, and when they finally came together, it was with a tenderness that made Eliza cry for entirely different reasons. "I love you," Thomas murmured against her skin. "I love you so much, Eliza." "I love you too," Eliza whispered back and meant it with every fiber of her being. They stayed in Tombstone for 1 more week while Thomas made arrangements with his boss at the ranch. He explained that he was married now and needed to bring his wife to live with him. The boss, a gruff man named Henderson, agreed to let them have one of the small cabins on the property. and Thomas spent his savings on supplies to make the place comfortable. The ranch was a 2-day ride north of Tombstone, nestled in a valley with good grazing land and a creek that ran year-round. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms, but it was clean and sturdy, and Eliza loved it immediately. She spent the first week scrubbing floors, hanging curtains she had sewn from feed sacks, and planting a small vegetable garden beside the porch. Thomas worked from dawn to dusk, but he always came home for supper, and they would sit together on the porch as the sun set, talking about their day, making plans for the future. Winter came early that year, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. Eliza learned how to keep the fire going, how to cook on the wood stove, how to preserve food for the lean months. She made friends with the other ranch wives, women who had their own hard stories but who welcomed her without judgment. She attended church on Sundays, helped organize a Christmas celebration, and slowly began to feel like she belonged. Thomas was patient with her, understanding when she had bad dreams, when memories would surface unexpectedly and leave her shaking. He never pushed her to talk about San Francisco unless she wanted to, never made her feel weak for being afraid. He was her rock, her safe harbor, and she fell more in love with him every day. In February, Eliza realized she was pregnant. The knowledge filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She wanted a child, wanted to create a family with Thomas, but the thought of bringing a baby into the world terrified her. What if she was a terrible mother? What if she could not protect her child the way she had not been able to protect herself? Thomas was overjoyed when she told him. He spun her around in the cabin, laughing, then set her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "Eliza, we are going to be parents. Are you sure we are ready for this?" Eliza asked, her hands resting on her still flat stomach. "I am sure," Thomas said firmly. "You are going to be an amazing mother, Eliza, I have no doubt about that." She wanted to believe him. She tried to believe him, but as her belly grew over the following months, so did her anxiety. She read every book about childbirth she could get her hands on, talked to the other ranch wives about their experiences, and prepared the cabin as best she could. Thomas built a cradle out of pine, sanding it smooth and carving their initials into the headboard. He was so excited, so ready, and Eliza tried to match his enthusiasm. The baby came in early October, after a long and difficult labor that left Eliza exhausted and terrified. But when the midwife placed the squalling infant in her arms, all the fear melted away. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair in Thomas's gray eyes, and Eliza felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. "We have a son," Thomas said, his voice choked with emotion as he sat beside the bed. "Eliza, we have a son." They named him James, after Thomas's father, and he was the light of their lives. Eliza threw herself into motherhood with the same determination she had applied to everything else, learning how to nurse, how to soothe, how to read the tiny cues that indicated what he needed. She was terrified of doing something wrong, but Thomas was always there, supporting her, reassuring her, taking his turn walking the floor when James would not sleep. The first year of James's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and precious moments. Eliza watched her son grow, marveling at every milestone, and felt a peace she had never known. This was her family. These were her people. This was the life she had fought so hard to claim, but the past had a way of catching up, no matter how far you ran. It was a hot afternoon in July when the stranger rode up to the ranch. Eliza was in the garden with James, who was 9 months old now and fascinated by everything. She looked up at the sound of hoofbeats and felt her blood run cold. The man was in his 50s, well-dressed, with a cruel mouth and cold eyes. She knew him immediately. He had been one of the regular customers at the brothel, a man who liked to hurt the girls, who paid extra for the privilege. His name was Cyrus Dalton, and he was a wealthy merchant from San Francisco who conducted business throughout the West. He reined in his horse and stared at her, recognition dawning slowly. "Well, well," he said, a smile spreading across his face, "if it is not little Eliza." I heard a rumor that one of Madame Lucille's girls had run off, but I never expected to find you here playing house." Eliza's hands tightened on James, pulling him close. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Oh, I think you do," Cyrus said, dismounting. "You cost Madame Lucille a lot of money when you disappeared. She has been looking for you, you know. There is a reward for anyone who brings you back." "I am not going back," Eliza said, her voice shaking. "I am a married woman now. I have a child. You cannot take me." "I can do whatever I want," Cyrus said, stepping closer. "Unless you want your husband to know what you really are. Does he know, Eliza? Does he know what you did in San Francisco?" "He knows everything," Eliza said, lifting her chin. "And he loves me anyway." "How touching," Cyrus sneered. "But I wonder if he knows the details. I wonder if he knows how you used to beg so prettily, how you would do anything if the price was right." "Get off this property," Eliza said, her fear turning to anger. "You have no right to be here." "I have every right," Cyrus said. "I am here on business with Mr. Henderson. But maybe I will have a word with your husband first. I am sure he would be very interested to hear about his wife's past." Eliza felt panic rising in her throat, but before she could respond, she heard footsteps behind her. Thomas emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, his eyes narrowing when he saw Cyrus. "Can I help you?" Thomas asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Thomas Grayson, I presume?" Cyrus said. "I was just having a chat with your lovely wife. We are old friends, you see." "Is that so?" Thomas said, looking at Eliza. She must have looked terrified because his expression hardened immediately. "Eliza, take James into the house." Eliza began. "Into the house," Thomas repeated, his eyes still on Cyrus. "Now." Eliza fled, James clutching her dress, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Inside the cabin, she set James in his cradle and stood by the window, watching. She could not hear what was being said, but she saw Thomas step close to Cyrus, saw the way his hand rested on his gun belt, saw the sudden paleness in Cyrus's face. The conversation lasted only a few minutes before Cyrus mounted his horse and rode away quickly, not looking back. Thomas stood in the yard for a long moment before turning toward the cabin. Eliza moved away from the window, her hands trembling. What had Cyrus told him? What lies had he spread? Thomas came through the door, his face grim. "Are you all right? What did he say to you?" Eliza asked. "He said a lot of things," Thomas replied. "None of them kind and none of them that I did not already know." "Thomas, I told him that if he ever came near you again, I would kill him," Thomas said flatly. "I told him that you are my wife, that this is your home, and that whatever happened in the past is not his concern or anyone else's. I told him that if I heard he had been spreading stories about you, I would hunt him down. He understood me." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. "You defended me." "Of course I did," Thomas said, pulling her into his arms. "You are my wife, I love you, and no one is going to take you from me or make you feel ashamed of surviving." Eliza clung to him, sobbing into his chest. She had been so afraid that Cyrus would destroy everything she had built, but Thomas had protected her, had stood up for her, had chosen her over the judgment of others. It was more than she had ever dared hope for. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much, Thomas." "I love you too," Thomas said, "and that is never going to change." Cyrus Dalton left the ranch that day and, as far as Eliza knew, never came back. She heard later that he had moved his business operations to Nevada, and she sent up a prayer of gratitude. She never wanted to see him again, never wanted to be reminded of the girl she had been in San Francisco. Life settled back into its comfortable rhythm. James grew into a bright, curious toddler who followed Thomas around like a shadow whenever his father was home. Eliza's garden flourished, and she started selling vegetables to the other ranch families, earning a little extra money that she saved in a tin under the floorboards. She and Thomas talked about buying their own land someday, about building a bigger house, about giving James brothers and sisters to grow up with. In the spring of 1884, Eliza gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Thomas's mother. She was tiny and delicate, with Eliza's dark hair and a temperament that was much calmer than James's had been. James, now 2.5, was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to hold her to help take care of her. Eliza watched her children together and felt a contentment she had never imagined possible. That summer, Thomas came home with news that Mr. Henderson was selling off parcels of the ranch to his longtime workers. For a fair price, Thomas could buy 200 acres of good grazing land along the creek, enough to start their own small cattle operation. "It is everything we have talked about," Thomas said, his eyes bright with excitement. "We can build our own house, raise our own herd, be our own bosses." "What do you think, Eliza?" "I think it sounds perfect," Eliza said, and meant it. They used their savings and took out a loan from the bank in Tombstone, and by fall they owned their own piece of land. Thomas and several of the other cowboys helped build a house, larger than the cabin, with 3 bedrooms and a real kitchen. Eliza planted trees in the yard, started a bigger garden, and set up a chicken coop. They bought 20 head of cattle to start with, and Thomas worked harder than Eliza had ever seen him work, determined to make their ranch successful. The first few years were difficult. There were droughts that killed the grass, harsh winters that took some of their cattle, and lean times when they had to stretch every penny. But they persevered, working side by side, supporting each other through the hardships. Their love grew deeper, stronger, tempered by adversity into something unbreakable. In 1886, Eliza gave birth to twin boys, David and Daniel, who were as different as night and day despite being identical in appearance. David was serious and thoughtful, while Daniel was wild and adventurous. Between the 4 children, Eliza was constantly busy, but she loved every chaotic moment. This was the life she had dreamed of during those dark nights in San Francisco, the life she had fought so hard to claim. Thomas was an amazing father, patient and loving, always making time to play with the children no matter how tired he was. He taught James how to ride, how to rope, how to mend fences. He taught Sarah how to whistle, how to skip stones on the creek, how to be brave even when she was afraid. And he was teaching the twins their letters, determined that all his children would know how to read and write. As the years passed, the ranch grew more prosperous. They added to their herd, built a larger barn, hired a couple of ranch hands to help with the work. Eliza's garden became legendary in the area, and she started preserving and selling her produce at the market in Tombstone. She made friends among the other ranch wives, attended church socials, and became a respected member of the community. No one asked about her past. If anyone knew or suspected, they kept it to themselves. Eliza was Mrs. Grayson, wife of Thomas, mother of 4, and that was all that mattered. She had worked hard to earn her place in this community, and she wore her respectability like armor against the memories that still haunted her. But she never forgot where she came from. She never forgot the girls still trapped in places like the brothel where she had been held. And when a young woman showed up in Tombstone in 1888, clearly running from something, clearly desperate, Eliza recognized herself in the girl's haunted eyes. Her name was Clara, and she was 19 years old. She had escaped from a brothel in El Paso and had been traveling for weeks, terrified that someone would find her and drag her back. She had no money, no family, no prospects, and she was on the verge of giving up. Eliza found her sitting outside the church, crying, and without hesitation, she brought the girl home. Thomas did not question her decision, just helped Eliza set up a bed in the spare room and treated Clara with the same respect he showed everyone. They gave her work helping with the children and the household chores, and they paid her a fair wage that she could save toward her own future. Clara stayed with them for 6 months, and in that time, Eliza saw her transform from a frightened, broken girl into a confident young woman. She taught Clara everything she knew about cooking, gardening, and managing a household. She helped her practice reading and writing, skills Clara had never had the chance to learn. And she told her own story, giving Clara hope that life after the brothel was possible. When Clara left to take a job as a schoolteacher in a nearby town, Eliza cried tears of joy. She had given this girl what no one had given her: a second chance, a safe place to heal, the tools to build a new life. It was the most meaningful thing she had ever done, and it inspired her to do more. Over the next several years, Eliza quietly helped other women who were escaping bad situations. She never advertised what she was doing, but word spread through the underground network of women who helped each other survive. She gave them shelter, work, references, and most importantly, she gave them hope. Thomas supported her completely, even when it meant extra mouths to feed or extra work for both of them. By 1892, the Grayson Ranch was thriving. They had over 200 head of cattle, 3 full-time ranch hands, and enough income to live comfortably. James was 11 now, already talking about taking over the ranch someday. Sarah was 8, sweet and helpful, always volunteering to care for the younger children. David and Daniel were 6, energetic and mischievous, keeping Eliza constantly on her toes. That fall, Eliza realized she was pregnant again. At 34, she had not expected another baby, but she was delighted nonetheless. Thomas was thrilled, and the children were excited about having another sibling. This pregnancy was easier than the others, and in the spring of 1893, Eliza gave birth to another daughter, whom they named Grace because she was, Thomas said, the Grace note on their perfect family. Life was good. Better than good. Eliza woke up every morning grateful for the blessings she had been given, for the man who loved her unconditionally, for the children who filled her days with laughter and love. She had come so far from that terrified girl who had stepped off the stagecoach in Tombstone 12 years ago. She had claimed her freedom, built a life, created a family, and found a purpose in helping others do the same. But there was one more ghost from her past that needed to be confronted. In the summer of 1894, Eliza received a letter from a lawyer in San Francisco. Madame Lucille had died, and her estate was being settled. Several of the women who had been at the brothel were coming forward with claims, and the lawyer was reaching out to former residents to see if they wanted to participate in the legal proceedings. Eliza read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking. Madame Lucille was dead. The woman who had owned her, who had beaten her, who had stolen 7 years of her life, was gone. Eliza did not know how to feel. There was relief, certainly, but also a strange sadness. She had survived, but how many others had not? She showed the letter to Thomas that evening after the children were in bed. "I want to go to San Francisco," she said. "I want to testify about what she did. I want to make sure that what happened to me and the other girls is part of the record." "Then we will go," Thomas said without hesitation. "I will arrange for someone to watch the ranch and the children. This is important, Eliza. You should do it." They traveled to San Francisco in August, leaving the children with Mrs. Patterson, who had retired from the boarding house and moved to a small cottage in Tombstone. The city was both familiar and foreign to Eliza. She recognized the streets, the buildings, but she was a different person now. She was not the frightened girl who had been trapped here. She was a woman with a family, a home, a life, and no one could take that from her. The legal proceedings were held in a courtroom downtown. Eliza sat with 7 other women, all former residents of the brothel, all with similar stories of being lured, trapped, and exploited. Some of them cried as they testified. Some of them were angry. Eliza was calm, her voice steady as she recounted what had been done to her. She named names, described conditions, detailed the violence and coercion that had been used to keep them compliant. The judge listened intently, and when the testimonies were complete, he ruled that Madame Lucille's estate would be divided among the women she had exploited. It was not a fortune, but it was something, an acknowledgement that they had been wronged, that they deserved restitution. Eliza used her portion of the money to establish a fund to help women escaping prostitution. She worked with a charitable organization in San Francisco that provided shelter, job training, and legal assistance to women in need. It felt right, using the money that had come from her suffering to help others escape similar fates. On their last day in San Francisco, Thomas took Eliza to the wharf. They stood looking out at the bay, and Thomas held her hand tightly. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Free," Eliza said, and realized it was true. She had confronted her past, spoken her truth, and reclaimed her story. She was no longer defined by what had been done to her. She was defined by who she had become, by the choices she had made, by the life she had built. "I am proud of you," Thomas said, pulling her close. "You are the bravest person I know, Eliza Grayson." "I could not have done any of this without you," Eliza said, looking up at him. "You gave me the courage to believe I was worth more than what happened to me. You loved me when I could not love myself. You are the reason I am free, Thomas, you and our children and the life we built together." "No," Thomas said, shaking his head. "You freed yourself, Eliza. You escaped, you survived, you built a life with your own 2 hands. I just had the privilege of loving you through it." They kissed there on the wharf, 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful out of pain and perseverance. And when they boarded the train back to Arizona, Eliza left San Francisco behind forever, taking with her only the lessons learned and the determination to keep helping others find their own freedom. The years that followed were peaceful and prosperous. The ranch continued to grow, and Thomas taught James everything he knew about running a cattle operation. Sarah proved to have a gift for numbers and started keeping the ranch books when she was just 13. The twins, David and Daniel, were inseparable, working together to manage the day-to-day tasks of the ranch. And Grace, the baby, was bright and curious, always asking questions, always wanting to learn. Eliza continued her work helping women in need. She never turned anyone away, and over the years, dozens of women passed through the Grayson Ranch on their way to new lives. Some stayed for a few days, some for a few months, but all of them left better equipped to face the world. Eliza taught them practical skills, but more importantly, she taught them that they had value, that what had been done to them did not define them, that they deserved happiness and respect and love. In 1900, James married a girl from Tombstone, a sweet young woman named Lucy who fit into the family perfectly. They built a house on the far side of the ranch property, and within a year they had given Eliza and Thomas their first grandchild, a boy they named Thomas Jr. Holding that baby in her arms, Eliza marveled at how far she had come. She was a grandmother now, a matriarch of a growing family, and the scared girl from San Francisco seemed like a distant memory. Sarah married a banker in 1902, and though she moved to Tucson, she visited often, always bringing her children to spend summers on the ranch. David surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a small school in Tombstone that served the children of ranchers and miners. Daniel stayed on the ranch, working alongside James and Thomas, and eventually married one of the women Eliza had helped, a quiet girl named Anna who had escaped a violent marriage and found peace on the Grayson Ranch. Grace, the youngest, was the most adventurous of the children. She went to nursing school in Phoenix and came back to open a small clinic in Tombstone, serving the medical needs of the community. She never married, choosing instead to dedicate her life to helping others, and Eliza saw so much of herself in her youngest daughter's fierce independence and compassion. By 1905, Thomas and Eliza were in their late 40s, still healthy and active, but starting to think about slowing down. James had taken over most of the ranch operations, and Thomas spent more time with his grandchildren, teaching them to ride and rope just as he had taught his own children. Eliza's garden was still legendary, but she had help now from Anna and Lucy, and she spent more time on her charitable work than on daily chores. One evening in early summer, Thomas and Eliza sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. The house was quiet for once, all the grandchildren having gone home, and it was just the two of them, the way it had been in the beginning. "Do you ever regret it?" Eliza asked. "Marrying me, taking on all the complications of my past?" Not for one single second, Thomas said, reaching for her hand. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Eliza. You and our children and this life we built. I would not change a single moment. Even the hard times, Eliza asked. Especially the hard times, Thomas said. They made us stronger. They taught us what we are capable of, and they showed me every day that I married the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman in the world. Eliza leaned her head on his shoulder, content. I was somebody's property once, she said softly, echoing the words she had spoken to him all those years ago. But you helped me see that I could be my own woman. You were always your own woman, Thomas corrected gently. You just needed someone to remind you. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. Two people who had found love in the most unlikely of circumstances, who had built a life together against all odds, who had turned pain into purpose and suffering into strength. They had created a legacy that would outlast them, a family that would carry their values forward, a community that was better because they had been part of it. As the years went on, Thomas and Eliza grew old together. They watched their grandchildren grow up, celebrated weddings and births, mourned losses and setbacks. They traveled a bit, visiting Sarah in Tucson and Grace in Phoenix, taking a trip to Texas to see the land where Thomas had grown up. But they always came back to the ranch, to the house they had built, to the life they had created. Thomas's hair turned gray, then white, and his hands grew gnarled from years of hard work. Eliza's face lined with wrinkles, each one earned through laughter or worry or love. But they were still the same people who had met in a boarding house in Tombstone, who had fallen in love despite the odds, who had chosen each other every single day for over 30 years. In the spring of 1910, Thomas fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, and by summer he was struggling to breathe. Grace came from Phoenix and diagnosed pneumonia, but despite her best efforts and all the modern medicine she could provide, Thomas grew weaker. The family gathered at the ranch, all the children and grandchildren wanting to be there, wanting to say goodbye. Eliza sat by Thomas's bedside day and night, holding his hand, talking to him about their life together. She reminded him of their first walk through Tombstone, of their wedding day, of the births of their children, of every precious moment they had shared. Thomas smiled, his eyes still bright with love even as his body failed. I am not afraid, he told her one evening when they were alone. I have had a good life, Eliza, a wonderful life, and it was all because of you. Do not say that, Eliza said, tears streaming down her face. You are the one who saved me. You are the one who taught me how to love, how to live. We saved each other, Thomas said, squeezing her hand weakly. That is what love does, Eliza. It saves us. He died peacefully 2 days later, surrounded by his family with Eliza holding his hand. She felt a part of her soul die with him, the part that had been his from the moment they met. The pain was unbearable, a physical ache in her chest that made it hard to breathe. But she was not alone. Her children gathered around her, supporting her, reminding her that Thomas's love lived on in them, in the grandchildren, in the life they had all built together. They buried Thomas on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple headstone that read Thomas Grayson, beloved husband, father, and friend. Eliza visited his grave every day, talking to him, telling him about the children and grandchildren, about the ranch, about the women she continued to help. She felt his presence always, a warm comfort that eased the loneliness. Eliza lived for another 15 years after Thomas died. She stayed on the ranch, helping with the grandchildren, working in her garden, continuing her charitable work. She published a small book about her experiences, not for profit but to give hope to other women who had survived similar traumas. The book was quietly circulated among women's organizations and shelters, and Eliza received letters from women all over the country, thanking her for sharing her story, for showing them that survival was possible. As Eliza grew older, she thought often about her life, about the journey from that terrified girl in San Francisco to the woman she had become. She had been owned, broken, exploited, but she had refused to stay that way. She had fought for her freedom, claimed her life, built something beautiful out of ashes. And she had loved and been loved by a man who saw her worth even when she could not see it herself. On a warm October evening in 1925, Eliza sat on her porch, now 87 years old, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. James ran the ranch now with his sons, and the land was more prosperous than ever. Sarah's children were successful in business and law. David's students had gone on to become teachers themselves, spreading education throughout the territory. Daniel and Anna's children worked the land with the same dedication their parents had shown. And Grace's clinic had expanded into a full hospital, serving thousands of people every year. Eliza looked around at the faces of her descendants and felt a profound gratitude. This was her legacy. Not the pain she had endured, not the scars she carried, but the love she had given and received, the lives she had touched, the family she had created. As the sun set on that October evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Eliza closed her eyes and felt Thomas's hand in hers. She knew it was impossible, that he had been gone for 15 years, but she felt him there beside her as clearly as if he had never left. "Are you ready?" She heard him whisper in her mind. "I am," Eliza whispered back, and let herself slip away peacefully, surrounded by love, her heart full of gratitude for the beautiful life she had lived. They buried her next to Thomas on the hill overlooking the ranch. Her headstone read Eliza Grayson, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and friend. She lived free. The ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family, each generation honoring the legacy of Thomas and Eliza. The fund Eliza had established to help women escaping exploitation grew into a full foundation, helping thousands of women find safety and rebuild their lives. Her book was eventually published commercially in the 1960s and became required reading in college courses about women's history and the American West. But more than any of that, Eliza's true legacy lived on in the hearts of those who had known her, in the stories passed down through the family about the strong, brave woman who had overcome unimaginable hardship to build a life of love and purpose. She had been somebody's property once, but she had become her own woman, and in doing so, she had shown others that they could do the same. Her great-great-grandchildren walked the land she and Thomas had claimed, played in the creek where their children had learned to swim, picked vegetables from gardens descended from the seeds she had planted. They heard stories about her courage, her kindness, her unwavering belief that every person deserved freedom and dignity and love. And they carried those values forward into their own lives, creating ripples that spread far beyond the ranch in Arizona, touching lives in ways Eliza could never have imagined. In the end, Eliza Harmon Grayson's life was proof that no matter how dark the past, no matter how deep the wounds, healing was possible. Love was possible. Freedom was possible. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you found someone who saw you not as what had been done to you, but as who you truly were. Someone who reminded you that you were your own woman, strong and worthy and deserving of every good thing life had to offer. The story of Thomas and Eliza became a legend in the family, a reminder that love could overcome any obstacle, that courage could transform any life, that two people who chose each other against all odds could build something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. It was a story of survival and redemption, of pain transformed into purpose, of a woman who had been owned but who had claimed her freedom and used it to help others do the same. And on warm summer evenings, when the family gathered on the ranch for reunions, the children would ask to hear the story again. The story of their great-great-great-grandmother who had come to Arizona with nothing but a carpetbag and a determination to be free, who had met a cowboy with kind eyes and a gentle heart, who had built a life and a family and a legacy that would never be forgotten. The land remembered them. The house remembered them. The creek and the hills and the wide Arizona sky remembered them. But most of all, the people they had touched, the lives they had changed, the family they had created remembered them. And in being remembered, in having their story told and retold, Thomas and Eliza lived on, a testament to the enduring power of love, courage, and the unbreakable human spirit.